can just report to them. Cool. Okay. I like half the people over here. I know. Oh yeah. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. We have a sign-in sheet over here, so if you have not signed in already, please go ahead and grab that and sign in. And then we will start with some introductions.
Sure. So I'm Mallory Garneau. I am a previous student both through the MSW and BSW program here at CSU, and for the past 6 years, I was running Coco Cafe, which is a nonprofit restaurant here in town. Pronouns are she, her, her, and yeah, we're happy to be here today.
And my name is Hannah Eppley. I also use she and her pronouns. And I work over in the School of Social Work. So my background is in social work. I did some case management, work with kids and families prior to joining the School of Social Work at CSU. And my role now is coordinating internships for social work students. So we were also hoping today that we could just quickly go around the room and do some brief introductions so that we can get an idea of the different areas that you all work in as we're presenting this content and talking about some different examples. So if we could start maybe on this side of the room, if you wouldn't mind sharing name, pronouns if you feel comfortable, and then the area at CSU that you work in.
Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. I use she and pronouns. I work in campus activities. And then I just thought that this session would be really interesting to attend. You never know what comes up in students' lives or people we might be serving. So here to just learn more.
Hi, I'm Cooper. I use he, him pronouns. Student employee in environmental services here at LSU. Hoping to get some transferable skills. Max, he, him pronouns, also environmental service. Yeah, just trying to get some new skills for this class.
My name is Brad. I'm also with Environmental Services. I've been here in this building for a little over 3 years, and then spent a little time with housing and dining prior to that. So.
I'm Sharon, she, her pronouns. I work in environmental services. I just think this is good to have.
I'm Sophia, not in environmental services. That's it, the Oregon Library, which is centralized pronouns. And yeah, just general interest.
I'm Sophia. And one that
My name is Trevor, and I'm in environmental services. I'm actually looking at going back to school and very helpful.
Thanks.
I'm Fisher, work in the LSC and business services. Definitely just want to learn how to do workplace and how to do that. I'm Esther, I work in LSC and HR. And definitely also LSC, HR, she, her, and
Students, dining services is from my wife's every day actually. I see results.
to call someone. I used to work in a crisis center.
Hello, my name is Garneau. I work in a program here at CSU. And and support.
If we lean on you two at all, don't be afraid to jump in. We appreciate all the expertise. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that. It's really helpful for us to understand who's in the room and what your roles are and kind of the different ways that you're interacting with both students, employees, people here on our campus. Okay, so to begin, we wanted to do a little bit of rooting and grounding in some of the theoretical perspectives that we're using when we're interacting with folks in crisis. So the first piece we want to touch on today is systems theory. So this is really like the foundation of social work practice and really the foundation of everything that we're doing when we're working with people day to day and interacting with people. So the basic premise of this, you see this kind of blurry diagram down here, but the idea is that we as individuals sit at the center of all these circles. And then we have all these systems around us that impact us and that we impact those systems. So as an individual, I have my own identities that I hold that are specific to me, but then I'm also part of a family system. I have friends, I have work colleagues, and then kind of expanding that system a little bit larger. I'm part of this CSU system. I'm part of the city of Fort Collins. I'm part of Larimer County. And all those different systems that I'm a part of are impacting me day to day. And they're impacting my views, my interactions with people, sometimes my behaviors. And I'm also conversely then impacting those different systems that I'm a part of. So that's just something for us to keep in mind as we're thinking about people and the different situations that they're in. We're really never, from a social work perspective, from the way we work with people, thinking about an individual as just an individual operating in isolation outside of everything else. All of these systems and groups that we're a part of have an impact on the things that are happening in our lives and the way that we show up in different environments.
And then the second theory we wanted to just touch on is, it kind of speaks for itself, but empowerment theory or strengths-based theory. And that's really focusing on the strengths of a person rather than their deficits or their incapabilities or their situation. And by doing so, they're able to build agency, really find what their own goals are and be able to reach them and find the steps to do so. Through working at the cafe, there's a lot of examples of this in everyday work that I did. One of the biggest things was providing the power of choice to people, especially those that are down on their luck. So often when people are down on their luck, they're used to being told they can't or no, or whatever it is, and having the option to choose and not just get what you're given, again, creates that sense of like self-worth, self-empowerment. And I've personally seen people move from homelessness to self-sufficiency just because of this one step of inclusion and giving them the agency to make their own decisions. So at the cafe every day, you either pay for your meal or you can come in and volunteer your time. And we have everything needs to get done, but we really do our best to give everyone the options of what volunteer tasks they're doing based on any disabilities or interests, whatever it might be. And that alone make sure the task gets done better, more properly. They enjoy it more. It's kind of a win-win. We've also, I did a CSU TEDx talk in 2018, and the topic was the power of choice. So I'd recommend checking that out if you wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about those stories at the cafe. But seeing it day to day over the last 6 years and having just this small thing that isn't really offering much, it's really just letting them know and understand that they have, they're worth something and they have what it takes. It's huge.
So the other thing we wanted to touch on today as part of this conversation is power, privilege, and oppression. So this is another piece that really comes into all of the work that we're doing with social workers, as social workers, with different people that we're interacting with. So I appreciate this quote from Paulo Freire. He's a philosopher and has done a lot with pedagogy and education. But he says, in order to create social change, we must begin the process with ourselves through a self-reflective process that examines our values and our lived experiences and any differences therein. So recognizing, kind of applying that systems theory that we just talked about, all of us in every interaction that we engage in are coming in with, I like to think of it a backpack. That's what one of my teachers taught me a long time ago, but a backpack of identities that we hold. Some of those have more privilege, some of those have less, but recognizing that every interaction with people that I enter, I'm coming in with privilege, with identities that are also going to impact the way I'm interacting with people. And that might not be verbally, it might not be that I'm coming in and saying, hi, I'm a white hetero cis woman, and this is how that's going to impact, but recognizing that when someone else interacts with me, they're seeing those identities, and that's going to impact the way they view me. It's going to impact power maybe that I have in the situation or that I don't have in the situation. And so it's really, really important as we start this process with engaging with each other to be cognizant of the identities that we're holding and how those show up in different spaces. There are times where I may name my identities, depending on the situation. Sometimes it is impactful to name power and differences in that space in a room and interactions. Sometimes it's not. And this isn't a whole class about power, privilege, and oppression. We could probably teach for semesters, maybe years on this topic. But that's not the entirety of our focus today. So recognize this is like a very broad overview, but it's something that felt like it would be amiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the identities that we bring into situations and being really aware of those things. Yeah, anything you would add to that, Mallory?
I don't know, that sounds like pretty good.
Okay.
Covered it.
Okay. Okay. We also wanted to talk today a little bit about trauma and what trauma is. So this is, I feel like it's become kind of a buzzword maybe, or a hot topic in our culture, in our society. It's something that I've been learning about for a long, long time, ever since I was in grad school as a social worker, and then through all of the work that I've done with people. A trauma-informed approach and an understanding of trauma has been central to all the interactions I have and all the work that I do. So I recently read a new book about trauma, and I really, really liked the definition that Gabor Mate gave. So his definition of trauma is an inner injury, a lasting rupture or split with the self due to difficult or hurtful events. Trauma is not what happens to you, but it's what happens inside you. So for me, this really emphasizes that sometimes we tend to think of trauma as an event, an occurrence. Think about like natural disasters, things like that. It's not so much about that specific event. It's about the impact of whatever that situation was, and kind of the ongoing impact in people's lives. So as I mentioned, this could be a singular event. Sometimes trauma is also an ongoing experience in relationships, be it caregiver-child, be it romantic relationships, that people have experienced kind of a series of events over time. There's also individual trauma, so something that someone has experienced just solely on their own. And then there's collective trauma, thinking about societies, cities, countries who've been at war, where groups of people have experienced something traumatic together. There's also a lot of research being done right now on multi-generational trauma. So the impact when a caregiver experiences trauma and then they carry some of that down to their kids, then maybe their kids are experiencing trauma, and trauma is kind of transmitted over generations. So I share all of that. That's a really brief snapshot. This is, again, a topic that we could teach on for days. And if you want resources or more information, research around trauma, we'd be happy to share that. I think we have tons of it at this point.
Yeah, I think also to add on to that,
Yeah.
with me and the work I've done, it is in the everyday work you do. You see people of all shapes and sizes and backgrounds coming in, and you don't know what their experience is. And being able to recognize your own position in that, going back to the previous slide, but also being really careful, again, in the impacts of trauma and how you can respond to those. Moving on to that section, it is a big mental health symptoms. It's underlying of many mental health symptoms. and it can create triggers. It can create a limit of response flexibility, so not being able to really make proper decisions or in a decent amount of time. It definitely shapes worldviews and views of ourselves. And then again, back to those triggers, that's one of the biggest things that I would see at Foco Cafe, being, you know, when you ultimately have someone upset in front of you, if you're, maybe it's usually a friend in your situation, usually maybe a touch on the shoulder or something is something that comes naturally to you, but knowing that you don't know them or what their triggers or experiences are, being really careful not to trigger them and bring up those traumas is super important as well.
One other thing that I would add here, as we're talking about this today and the impact, this is something I think that's really common in interactions that we have with people. And I want to emphasize that it's not so much about needing to know, again, what that event was, what the trauma is. That's definitely not our role in most settings, in most situations, unless we're therapists and we're helping someone specifically work through their trauma. We don't necessarily need to know in everyday interactions what that trauma is. Our goal with understanding trauma is being able to take a trauma-informed approach when we're interacting with people. So again, we're not digging into what this history is, what these events were, but there's ways that we're going to talk about that we can interact with folks to take a more supportive trauma-informed approach in our day-to-day interactions without that history piece or without that background piece.
Critical point.
Yes, I was like, we should mention this. Okay, we're going to start talking a little bit about tools to engage and support. Okay. First on this list is self-regulation. Just by like quick show of hands, is this a term that people are familiar with? Have you heard this before? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to go with me and do a little exercise here. So you can participate to whatever your comfort level is. There is no pressure here. So feel free to opt out and just sit if that feels best to you. But if you would like to participate, I'm going to ask you to sit in your chair in a way that feels comfortable and supported, whatever that looks like for you. Okay. Then once you have yourself situated in your chair, you can turn your gaze down toward the floor. You can close your eyes, but you don't have to. Sometimes it's not comfortable to close your eyes in a setting like this, but just find one thing to focus your gaze on and kind of steady your attention. So over the next few minutes, you're just going to focus on the way that your body feels and any sensations that are present in your body. This could be clothes on your skin. It could be any tension that you're feeling in your muscles. It might be the absence of sensation. So your only job for the next few minutes is just to observe any sensations that are present. Go ahead and call your attention down toward your feet. Notice the soles of your feet. Notice your toes, your heel. Notice the feeling of your shoe. Any sensations on the tops of your feet. And let your awareness move up to your calves, your shins. Notice anything that's present in this part of your body. Observe the space around your knees, fronts of your knees, the backs of your knees. Notice anything that's touching your knees, your clothes, the chair. And let your awareness move up toward your thighs, your hips. Just observing, noticing anything that's present, and just letting those sensations be present. Not changing, not shifting, just noticing what is. Let your awareness move up to your abdomen. And up into your back. Noticing any feelings, if you're hungry, if you're full, if you're digesting, if your back is supported, if it's not supported. Notice any feelings present in your chest, your upper back. And then start to connect with your breath. Again, not changing. Just taking a minute to notice the flow of your breath, the feeling of your breath, the sound, the texture. Let your awareness move up toward your head. Noticing any sensations that are present around your face and your jaw and your brow. And then slowly let your awareness expand, moving back down toward your feet, drifting back up toward your head. Allowing yourself to notice your entire body. And then at your own pace, as you feel ready, you can start to move your gaze back up. You can open your eyes. You can move around a little bit in your chair. That was a body scan exercise. Thank you for going with me on that little adventure this afternoon. Hopefully that didn't prepare you for a nap for the rest of this hour. That's what I feel like sometimes after I do that. So that's one tool that we use for self-regulation. So some other things you can do breathing exercises. Sometimes physical movement is helpful in regulating us, especially if our energy levels are higher. There are lots and lots of things that you can do in this space of self-regulation. And we talk about this because it's really important when we're interacting with folks just day to day, and especially when we're interacting with folks who are experiencing any type of crisis, for us to be regulated first. Because another part of our interaction with people is often co-regulation. So this is the act of regulating ourselves and then bringing some things into the environment to support the people we're working with in regulating. Because sometimes when we're in a more heightened state, when we get triggered by something, sometimes we lose that ability to connect with ourselves and to regulate ourselves. So when we're in a position to support someone else, staying regulated on our end is really helpful and can actually be a helpful tool for the people that we're interacting with and helping them to regulate too. So that was the purpose of that little practice. And I would encourage you all to explore some things that work for you, especially as you're engaging in these interactions, being in tune with your body, noticing how you're feeling, and then taking steps to regulate in whatever way works for you. It certainly does not always have to be a body scan or deep breathing. That's a tool. But noticing that and being aware of that for yourselves is super, super important.
I like a similar version of a body scan personally. And it's starting from your head. It's the same exact process, but it starts from your head and you basically imagine water pouring down you. And as you scan each part of your body, you're relaxing it. And every time, I mean, then you're really ready for a nap, but it's like the best thing that's worked for me. So like she said, play around with it, do what works for you. There's a lot of different trying. Person first approach, who's heard of this? Yeah, it's kind of a newer one and maybe less of a buzzword, but it basically means putting the person before whatever it is that they're experiencing. I'm always treating them as a person first and foremost. They may be going through something or experiencing problems, but it does not define them. So for example, you'd always say a person who's experiencing homelessness, not a homeless person. Does that make sense? Pretty straightforward, but it's very important to make sure that you're showing them that you see them as a person and not just as another statistic, I guess. How to talk to someone in crisis. Probably for me, one of the hardest things sometimes is where do you start? How do you approach someone? What don't you say? All those things. And at the end of this, I have a link with a lot of this. So if you don't get screenshots to write it all down, there's a nice link for you to use at the end. But first and foremost, how do you recognize when someone needs support? There's definitely signs that people can show, different patterns of their behavior, drastic changes in their weight, either drastic weight loss or weight gain, aggravation or a change in their personality. Depending on how well you know the person, you may or may not be in the position to make the judgment call. If it's a friend, you're a lot more likely to be able to maybe feel comfortable approaching and noticing these signs. But you do have to kind of step easy and be aware that you don't know someone's situation, and it's, especially if you don't know them, it's definitely not your place to impede if it doesn't seem like something that they are trying to perceive. Excessive, uncharacteristic use of alcohol, other drugs, kind of the textbook examples. Where to talk. I think so often we're so disconnected, and personally, I'm a big texter. If I want to check in on someone, I'll text them, or on social media. That's really not a safe space. Texting maybe, but social media, not so much. So asking someone to go for coffee, going for a walk, being outside in nature is really helpful. And also sometimes talking side by side rather than face to face can be really productive and make people feel very comfortable, because again, there's just a little bit more freedom to it. So going for a walk is one of my favorite ones on a bench at the park is great. How to start the conversation. There's definitely a lot of stigma around this, especially when it comes to suicidal ideations and things like that. I just did a training on that, and so you all know, if you don't already, it does not give them the idea to commit suicide if you're asking them if they have thoughts of it. So again, make sure, we'll go over this a little bit later, making sure you're staying in your lane and you're understanding whether or not this is a situation for you to handle or not. There's things that you can say to help start the conversation if you think someone needs support and they may not be directly asking you for it. Just asking how they are. Saying, how can I support you? You can be more direct or you can be vague. I think, the first step is just starting it. If they won't start it and you really feel like you need to take a step forward, I think that just asking simple questions about how they're doing is a really great. That link at the end will have a lot of specific examples. How to listen, we'll go over this a little bit more in depth because it's definitely one of the most important aspects of this. But listen actively. So as you're listening, don't think about, okay, what am I going to say next? Very much be in the moment, listen to them. very oftentimes listening can be the best tool you have. So often people don't feel heard or seen. And so often we don't have the tools to provide anything more than that. So if that's all you have, that's a really good thing. How to follow up, definitely if there's services that you provide to them or direct them towards, that's awesome. And then checking in with them often if it's, again, the right sort of relationship, if it's a friend or family member or something like that, and how they're doing. And then what not to say, a couple examples of that, in order to show understanding and compassion, you want to avoid with triggering situations. Don't say things like, think happy thoughts, or you have no reason to be upset. You have this and that, you have no reason to be upset. Hang in there, it'll pass. Really validating, because that unvalidates their feelings, really validating their feelings, that is super important. So just being sure and aware of those. And then I think we'll dig into active listening a little bit more now.
One thing to just add, Mallory, to what you were saying in that validation process, that's so important to validate where people are at and how they're showing up. And one thing too that Mallory mentioned a little bit in terms of like starting the conversation, naming the observations and letting people know like, hey, I see you. I see that, you know, this looks like you're really sad today, or I see that you're tearful. Do you want to talk? Do you want to go for a walk? Or noticing if somebody hasn't showed up at work for a few days, rather than avoiding some of those topics. I won't speak for everyone in the room, but for me, definitely my first tendency sometimes is to be like, ooh, this might be a hard topic. So I'm not going to talk, like, I'm not going to ask you about it because I don't want to make you more sad, or I don't want to trigger something. But really, when we observe those things and we name them, and we sometimes come alongside people and say like, hey, I noticed that you haven't showed up in a few days. Are you okay? Just something that simple really communicates to people that, hey, I'm invested. Hey, I'm noticing what's happening. So just naming some of those observations that we sometimes have a tendency to shy away from can be really powerful in coming alongside people and supporting them. Okay, active listening. Are we, show of hands, familiar with active listening? Not familiar? Experts. Perfect. So this is just a reminder. I know this is something that a lot of us have probably had some exposure to at some point or another. And I think sometimes when I think about active listening, I'm like, oh, it's automatic. I do it all the time. I don't need to talk about this. And then if I reflect on conversations that I'm having, I'm like, ooh, Hannah, you are not actively listening.
What was that name again?
Right. You are listening to respond to them. So this really, while it seems maybe a little bit elementary or basic, it really does require our intentionality, and it requires some skill that we have to kind of build and flex over time. So that's why I'm bringing this in here today. I think it's really important. So active listening looks like being fully present in the moment. So for me, this looks like not scrolling on Instagram while my partner is talking to me about their day. That is not active listening. I do that on occasion. Eye contact, super important. That really helps people feel like you're invested in the conversation, you're hearing them, you're present with them. Yeah.
What if some people don't really like eye contact?
That is a great question. So this is also, this can be, there are a few factors. This could be a cultural consideration. For some folks culturally, this isn't comfortable for them. Some folks who've experienced trauma, also not comfortable with this. So take cues from whoever you're talking to. If you're sitting across from someone and they're not making eye contact with you, don't be like, hey, eye contact, please. Not helpful, not trauma informed, not supportive. That might be a great space if you're noticing that, to say, hey, maybe we could go for a walk and converse side by side instead of across from each other. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm noticing that you're not giving me a lot of eye contact and it seems like that's kind of uncomfortable for you based on your body language and other things I'm reading, I may also stop giving you as much eye contact. So being attentive to the person that you're interacting with is super important here. That's a great point. This is not a one size fits all. active listening. This is just kind of a general, like, many situations, this is helpful, and tailor it to whoever you're supporting and talking to. And hopefully my eye contact through that wasn't making you uncomfortable. I'm sorry if it was. Body language, also important. So the way we sit, the way we cross our arms, don't cross our arms, the way we drop our shoulders forward, the way we don't, all of that can communicate things about the way that we're feeling and about the way other people are feeling. So again, that's just something to be aware of when you're in a conversation, and think about. And we can't always interpret how we're going to be perceived by the people that we're interacting with. But if I'm in a conversation and I'm kind of showing up like this with my eyebrows all like scrunched up and my arms crossed, but I'm trying to like, hey, I'm here for you. I really want to support you. People are probably going to be like, what's happening in her world right now? Is she here to support us? So just being aware of some of those things, which takes some intentionality and again, some noticing of how we're showing up, what our bodies are saying, what our faces are saying. Reflecting back what people say to you, super important. This can really demonstrate that you're listening and that you're understanding. Also here, leaving room if you repeat something back to someone and say, oh, okay, so I think I understand what you're saying. You said this, and they say, no way, absolutely not. Okay, cool. Ask another question. Can you help me understand? That's a way to really check and see, are we on the same page? Am I understanding what you're communicating to me?
Paraphrasing is one of my favorite things to really get myself intentional and active listening. You know, again, I think I'm doing it, but putting in that last step at the end of the conversation or at the end of whatever they say, just paraphrasing it, gets me, again, to keep my mind on the prize the whole time and to actually be listening so that my response is the paraphrasing, not what I just want to say.
And that's perfect. Listening to understand, not listening to respond. So I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next. I'm thinking about what you're saying. And like Mallory shared, paraphrasing is a great way to get yourself out of that cycle of, okay, I got to respond. What am I going to say next? And just be present and listen to the person. Brene Brown has this great little video on the difference between sympathy and empathy. In the consideration of time today, I'm not going to play it, but if folks would like the link, we're happy to send it out. You have probably seen it. It's a little bit old. I think I've watched it 100 times. But it's a great reminder about the difference between those two and what it looks like to show up in an empathetic way versus a sympathetic way. So we can send that resource out.
Resource navigation. Resource navigation can be really difficult for folks that are experiencing a crisis, especially if there's multiple aspects to it, housing, food insecurity, whatever it might be. So doing your best to know what the resources are is great, but also knowing that you don't know everything, and being sure to use those resources that are available to you. So what is resource navigation? It's connecting folks with resources to meet their identified goals and needs. And it's also supporting folks in navigating complex service systems. So sometimes this looks like, you know, oftentimes if someone were to come up to you and say, hey, I need to know about the shelters, rather than just handing them a packet that you have, which you can do, which is helpful. Helping them navigate again, or asking if they know if they have the resources to navigate. Do they have a phone to call them? Sure, to apply for their SNAP, whatever it might be. So asking those additional questions when you're helping someone navigate the resources is super important. And like I had said before, and I think we've said probably many times, it's just if listening is the only tool you feel you have, that can be like the most important tool there is. So again, if you feel overwhelmed by maybe the situation, just listen. And it's okay to call on reinforcements and help. And just again, self-regulating, knowing your space and what you know, and bring to the table is super important. So in my experience with helping people in crisis, I feel like resource navigation was one of the biggest things. I'd say, oh, I know all these great places we go, or I'll help you call him, but it would be so overwhelming that they think it would take a week to do it, that there's, you know, years of waiting, or that they've already tried that. And just, again, the support process around the navigation of resources has been life changing for some people. Just feeling supported, again, not even like doing anything for them, but just supporting them along the way. Same thing as listening, it can be huge.
This is another space where I think it's helpful to touch a little bit on power and privilege. And as, you know, if you're supporting someone and you're sending them to a resource, recognizing that the way that I might access that resource might look different from the person that I'm supporting is really important. And sometimes that just looks like asking a few more questions or recognizing like, hey, if I tell you, oh, just go to the food bank, they can help you, they can meet your needs. Okay, can that person get there? Do they have transportation? Do they know how the bus system works? Recognizing that there might be some additional barriers in this process, which is where Mallory was sharing that support piece in navigating the resources can be super, super helpful.
And then also going back to kind of knowing yourself and what you can offer. If you're trying to help someone and you're unsure of what you're offering, there's a lot more room for harm than good if you're directing someone in the wrong direction or doing it in a way that isn't supportive, or doing it or just not getting into the right resources, whatever it might be. It's just super important again to kind of know your stance and how you can help. And again, if there's nothing you feel like you can do, listening is always good.
Sorry, I'll keep using my mouse behind me. I think we touched on all of this in terms of supporting others with navigating resources. So super important as we talk about some of these things, staying in your lane. So our goal today was not to train all of you to be therapists, to be crisis interveners. Our goal was to give you some tools to engage in different ways with different people in your lives. So knowing for yourself, in any given situation with whoever you're interacting with, what's your role? Are you at work? Is this a friend? Is it a family member? Is this a classmate? What role are you playing? What hats are you wearing, for lack of a better term there? And what is your expertise in training? So if you're not the expert on all the community resources there are out there, that's okay. You don't have to be. There are lots of people who do that all day, every day. So just knowing who those people are and being able to make a warm handoff, share some information about that is great. Coming back again to some of those basics around listening and support is huge. That's definitely within the scope. As a colleague, as a classmate, as a friend, don't feel like you have to carry the entire situation and solve the entire situation challenge that someone might be experiencing. That's typically not our role. So knowing who the experts are, so thinking about resources, and we'll give you some of this information here in a few minutes. But thinking about like, who are the experts in this particular area? Has this person expressed that they're struggling with mental health? If so, who might I refer them to versus trying to act as their therapist while I'm also their colleague or their supervisor? Probably not great to combine those things or mix those things. Okay, taking action. This is the exciting part. So we're going to start here with ourselves. Again, kind of coming back to this idea of our own regulation and supporting ourselves. This is super, super, super important when we're supporting anyone else. There is this fantastic therapist that I really, really enjoy. Her name is Vicki Reynolds. She does a lot of work around liberation and around clinical supervision. And she talks about staying in this zone of fabulousness is what she calls it, which I also just think is a really fun name. So this is the idea that we're not moving too close and getting enmeshed with whoever we're supporting. So I'm not taking that crisis on as my own. This isn't something that if I'm supporting my colleague at work, ideally I'm not then going home and spending all night talking about this situation, waking up at 2 a.m. thinking about this situation, and just like involving myself to a point that's really not helpful. Then there's also the flip side of disconnection, being numb to the situations that other people are experiencing, Really just kind of taking this hands-off approach, like, nope, you got this. I don't want to talk to you about your feelings. I don't want to help with this. I don't want to feel this. So those are kind of like the two ends of this spectrum. The ideal would be falling somewhere in the middle of that. So being able to listen, being able to be present with folks who are experiencing challenges, who might be in crisis, being able to maybe share some information with them about resources that are available, about other folks who might be able to support them, and kind of staying in that space where we're able to be empathetic, we're able to feel, we're able to stay engaged, but we haven't moved so far into this that this is now our crisis, our challenge, in our personal situation. A few other helpful, I think, pointers just in terms of like your own resilience and taking care of yourselves. These all come from a curriculum that was actually developed for caseworkers, and they were developed to support with like secondary trauma for folks who are working in helping professions, but I think that they're really helpful for like all of us. So the first one is around optimism. This isn't like silver lining everything. This isn't just ignoring negative things that might be happening, but it is looking for positives in situations. Similar to what Mallory shared earlier about strengths perspective or a strengths-based approach, finding some highlights in different situations and paying attention to those and being conscious about that is really important. Collaboration. So whatever this looks like for you, if you're engaging with a colleague who's struggling, if you're in a helping profession and working at Tell Someone and dealing with crisis day in and day out, if you have a family member who's struggling, connecting with other people is super, super, super important to our own resilience. So leaning on community that you have, collaborating with colleagues, and being willing to engage in relationship with people is a really big part of maintaining our own resilience as we're also supporting other folks. And lastly is mastery. So this is just the idea of paying attention to your own strengths, paying attention to spaces where you feel like you're good at something, where you feel like you have strengths, where you're feeling successful, and intentionally like digging into those areas and paying attention to them. I think this is sometimes not something that we do every day or automatically. Sometimes we tend to take a more deficit-based approach to ourselves and just pay attention to the things that we aren't that great at or that we don't feel as strong in. But part of maintaining our own resilience is also tapping into the things that we are good at, because we do all have strengths, and it's okay to pay attention to those as humans and as supports for other people.
Putting it all together. So we went through everything here. There are basically kind of 3 different steps. You've got the engagement with them, the person first approach. What is that again? Tell me. Yeah.
Just like putting the person before the issue, right? Experience.
Great, perfect. So using the person first approach as you're communicating with them. Again, that active listening part is super key. I love the paraphrasing aspect of it to keep me on point, and then being empathetic and being aware of kind of the background and the potential trauma they might have experienced, all that kind of thing. All that kind of stuff. And then the assessment aspect, what is the need? Did they tell you what it was, or did you see what it was? Did they give off signs for it? Who determined it? Again, was it them or was it you? And is it your space to get involved at that point? And then again, the active listening and the assessment part to really decipher, am I staying in my lane here? Is this belong with someone else's? And then the last step is the referrals, the connections, the follow-up, that sort of thing. We do have quite a few references for you that you can use and take away with you and hopefully provide to folks that might need them. Yeah, that's kind of anything to add to that.
I think the only thing I would add, Mallory, is just kind of pulling folks' attention back to the empowerment topic that Mallory talked about at the beginning. So sometimes when we start in on this assessment phase and we're like, I want to connect people with resources, or I want to share something helpful, we feel this need to like do something because we might want to fix, we might want to save. That's not a great space to operate from. So again, assessing like, did whoever you're supporting tell you what they need? Did they communicate with you what they're looking for, what's happening? And then can you make a connection from there? But really like giving that power back to them, like Mallory talked about, that is so, so, so important. And it's so powerful for people, really, for all of us. When we go to make change in our lives, I am so not motivated to change anything when someone close to me tells me like, you should do this differently. I'm like, nope, I don't think so. Which maybe isn't healthy and I should maybe look at that for myself. But really, I am so much more apt to make changes, to really grasp onto something and do things differently in my life. If it's something that I've identified, whether that's in conversation with someone else or not, it needs to be something that I'm invested in. And that goes for all of us. That goes for everybody we interact with. So really being conscious here, if you're like, I think this person might be on like the verge of becoming houseless, I want to refer them to all these places. Well, hang on a second. Have they talked to you about what's going on? Have they communicated about what the need is? And sometimes just that act, like Mallory said, of listening, of communicating, of letting them know, hey, I'm here for you. Hey, I see you. Hey, I'm happy to just listen. Sometimes that's all that's needed in this whole process. So kind of coming back to the basics.
It reminds me as a community level social worker of, it's similar to going into a community and saying, this is what you need without asking the community itself what it needs. I have an example when I studied abroad in South Africa. This international workers group came and did and put a well in this town where they were, walking 5 miles both ways every day to get water. And they said, you know what, they need a well. We're going to put a well in and they'll be good. They put a well in, no one used it. They found after they talked to the people about why they weren't using it, they realized that they didn't want it. They never did. They liked their walks. That gives the women time away from their husbands, gives them time to chat, gives them exercise for their culture. It's the same thing. Don't come into someone's life and think you know what's best for them. It's super important to really gauge where they're at and have them be the driving factor.
Okay. So here's some resources. This is not by any means exhaustive. These are just a few places to start. And there are some folks here on our campus who literally are pros at this. It is what they do day in, day out. Friends at Tell Someone, if there's anything you would add to this, because you're pros, feel free to jump in. So CSU Case Management, and I actually want to show you all this. They have a really cool page on their website, lists tons of resources. Oh, over here. Okay, so if you're looking for resources for yourself, for someone else, we've got all kinds of information here. Every single one of these arrows pops out a whole list of things. The people who work at Case Management can also help you navigate correct. Don't be afraid to call them. They're super nice. Don't be afraid to go talk to them. CSU Health Network is a fabulous resource for any kind of mental health, well-being related support. We've got food pantry here on campus, which is pretty cool. And they've got pocket pantries popping up everywhere. Our friends at Tell Someone. Is there anything y'all want to share about Tell Someone?
There's so much that I don't know. This is if we're dealing just with campus life, please use Tell Someone. Is Tell Someone only for students? No. So you concerned about maybe perhaps coworker. Okay, thank you. Please use it.
More specific services, like if somebody is experiencing domestic violence.
That's it. We're mandated and not there is interpersonal violence, sorry. It's kind of like that. You preface that with house one, and then we'll get it to where it needs to go. So I think hopefully you're on 30 that are important with us and you can figure out where. And there's also private. We were just not funny, but we were work over it. Just have it. or an environment that causes people to stand, although they don't use that situation. So it's 30,000 people, and they do game a list of what they do. And even it's mind boggling, but they do it. They are well oiled. Anyway. I would say. So there's always. What are the next steps? Yes. Whatever is in here. It's okay, because we'll get it, and it doesn't. Reach out to the person and say, hey, so said you're, or felt something. We're gonna investigate that, and if you think somebody's different, or they're someone else is coming to see that as well. And that's what we're doing. And just honor how you feel.
And that's huge. Like I've definitely called them and been like, hey, I don't really know. What do you think? Can you help? They can. They can help navigate, they can help direct. And again, they're experts on all of the resources we have here on campus. So don't be afraid to reach out. That's another example of that collaboration. You don't have to support on your own. You don't have to do this on your own. And then I realized after I put this on the slide that this might be an outdated acronym, SDPS. No? Okay. I was like, I didn't double check if that was still accurate. There are a ton of amazing offices. You all probably know this better than I do. Many of you work here in the Student Center. There are amazing places for people to find community here, for people to receive support. I'm not advocating that you should send someone who's experiencing a mental health crisis to Pride, but recognizing if someone communicates with you that like they're seeking community, and that's a need that they have, there are so many great places here in this building where folks can find community, where they can find support. So that's another great place to reach out to, even like walk over there with somebody, take a walk, meet some people in some of these different offices here. So there's a wealth of supports available, and it can be a little bit overwhelming to feel like, oh, I have to know all these, or I have to be able to navigate all of these. You don't. Just keep a few key ones in your head, be open to learning, be open to doing the research. Sometimes that's supportive for people. If they say, hey, I have this need, it's okay if the answer is, oh, I don't know if I know like where you should go or who could maybe help you with that, but could we look into it together? Could I do some research? Could I help you find out? That's really powerful, even to just invest in that process with people. Whoops. Oh, I'm going
We're
wrong.
gonna
Sorry.
Community resources, we have quite a bit. Connections is one of my favorites. I use them a bunch. They're kind of the go-to connect all place in the community. I've called them just someone is in crisis with me and I don't know how to help them. Call Connections and they can direct you to whether it's mental health or homelessness or food insecurity or whatever their issue might be. They are well connected with that, and that's what they do is make those connections. What is 211 again?
211 is kind of a resource hub. So you can call the number 211. You can also Google United Way 211 Larimer County, and they have an exhaustive resource list for our community. That's a huge part of what this agency does, is just updates resources that are available for folks. So this is a great place to look if you're like, I don't really know where to direct or how to guide. 211 is great.
Always good places to start those first too. How to talk to someone in crisis. Those are just examples of questions and what not to say, what to say, where to talk, that sort of thing. Just gives you a little bit more concrete examples and ideas. Then we've got the Food Bank of Larimer County, open to everyone, obviously for mostly food insecure homelessness, but again, for whatever people might need in that realm. Foco Cafe fits within that same realm. It is food insecurity related. We do see the majority of our folks in need that join us are experiencing homelessness. And Foco Cafe is also just, and I don't work there anymore, so there's no sponsorship here. But it's also a really great place for community in that we have people from all walks of life. That only works because we have people from all walks of life. So you have the mayor coming in, you've got people with money, you've got people experiencing homelessness, you've got families, you've got individuals, you've got everything. And I always said, you know, what better place to have community than one that has a little bit of all of it. It's not very segregated, it is very diverse, and it's very opening and welcoming. And you can kind of be who you want to be. You can be a volunteer, you can just be a patron, you can just come enjoy the garden. You can really choose how you engage there. So I'm always a fan of that as a resource. Outreach Fort Collins is probably my #1 favorite resource through Foco Cafe, just because it was what I use the most. They're a big partner of Foco Cafe, and they focus mostly on homelessness. And they have, with that link, they have a really awesome all-inclusive resource guide for folks that are experiencing homelessness and food insecurity. And then Summit Stone Crisis Center, this is great for mental health needs. They've got a crisis hotline and other resources like that.
Okay. In the interest of time, we were going to have y'all do role plays because we're social workers and that's what we did in school. Just kidding. We weren't going to make you role play. That's me. I didn't like that experience. We were going to do some small group like skills practice. But in the interest of time, we also want to leave just space for you all to ask some questions. If there's like scenarios or things that you're curious about, we want to leave space for that. So we're going to pass on the skills practice for today and move into some question and answer time.
Yeah, I have a question. It's just based on your Foco Cafe experience, that people would come in and you have all these resources. Do you ever just sit down with them, like with a laptop, and go through things with them for the resources?
Yes, all the time. That's why my main point in most of this, it feels like it's really that active listening, and you don't even have to really provide them anything as long as you know you're with them. Just let's figure this out together has been so helpful. But even if you're not the one to give them more than the support and see them.
Right, because I would think that and if they go to the library or something.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have the opportunity, and there was only one of me, right? So there's gotta be more of us that, you know, go alongside people and help them with. We have the small skills to help with, and slow the difference. Has anyone in here, I'm curious, experienced a situation at work that they'd be willing to share where maybe they didn't know what to do and they wish they did and kind of want to just go through like a scenario sort of thing that could help the whole, yeah. Love it.
Sorry, because it was actually I wanted to ask. So for context, I think environmental services might also be able to relate to this. I supervise students that work the front desk, sorry, it's not called the front desk. I supervise students that work at campus information and box office. So it is the main desk on the main level of the LC right by the closet doors. And my question was kind of around how do you support individuals in crisis in a very public setting? And the reason why I asked that is because sometimes with thousands of people coming in through these doors, our staff at the desk and the environmental services at times might see students or patrons going through a crisis like in the food court or right at the entrance of the plaza. And I think I'm not a professional, and my students, I definitely do not expect them to handle those situations, but I guess for me, I would like to know like if you have any suggestions or guidance on that. I think in the past, how I've handled crisis is we have like our LSC protocols, which oftentimes I communicate with building managers so that they can put incident reports in. And sometimes with that comes, you know, you see health and police coming to make sure everything's okay, but I also know that those are not always helpful in those situations. And in one instance, I walked a student to case management, like physically to the building to help them, but I just know that like sometimes, especially with identities, people might respond well to police being called, right? So I'm just, that's my scenario, and I'm curious, like, how do we handle crisis when they're very public and there's thousands of people walking around and staff that are just like not sure what to do and maybe sometimes kind of scared and concerned. Yeah.
Good question.
You want to start?
Well, I guess, so from hearing you, it sounds like you're talking about something that couldn't actually be handled like later on. Because one suggestion is just like setting up a time to talk with them, like, you know, I saw this happen the other day, but that's not so much with just like someone coming to a game or coming.
Yeah, it'll be like, I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in, but it'll be like someone who's clearly struggling with mental health and they are very publicly crying and totally like spiraling in front of our info desk.
Sure.
Or things like that where, you know, they also might be special needs and they're also going through crisis, right? And it's one of those things where I'll get a call right away and I'll come up and support students. So I don't expect them to handle it anyway, but I guess like for those of us that are staff in this building, like what is the best way to kind of, you know, handle the situation? I think for me, it's like I try to kind of bring the individual down a little bit by, you know, like saying like, hey, let's go, like, you know, take a seat, or let's kind of, you know, talk me through what's going on. I kind of just try to de-escalate, but I'm not a professional, so sometimes I don't know what the best way is to go talk.
You're definitely on the right track with the de-escalation and the co-regulation kind of skills. This is very relevant to what I've worked in at the Foco Cafe. We're having lunch service and people are enjoying meals with their children, and someone comes in a little, maybe they're on drugs or who knows really what their situation is, but they're not in a state to be in that setting. And sometimes they don't want to leave, and you know, really having to be careful, and cops we're always our last resort, because again, that just really disrupts things further sometimes, depending on the situation. So yes, de-escalation, getting them, removing them from the situation, finding a quiet place. I'd often go outside, or we park right across the street somewhere that's quiet enough, because oftentimes all that stimulus can be part of it too, triggering. So yes, on the right track with de-escalation, co-regulating, and removing them as much as possible, or at least being able to sit down and create your own space, whether it's actually physically being in a different space or not, is huge. I think that's like the most important things you can do. And then personally, I think that Outreach Fort Collins, they are huge on homelessness, but they are crisis intervention. So what we would do at the cafe is we would, you know, jump into action, do what we could to de-escalate the situation, calm them down, see how we could support them, listen to them. Oftentimes they're just upset and want to tell you what's going on. So do, you know, what you can, and then we would call Outreach Fort Collins. That's what they do is de-escalation and kind of controlling situations. And they work closely with the police department too, so they'll know when it's beyond their hands. And they are just a really great support system. So I would have their number handy, and they have people on call, and they're like in the middle of the night, like they're all the time. Outreach Fort Collins.
Would that be appropriate to bring to CSU then too? Like,
I believe so. I would double check on. No. Okay, please answer that for us.
It's not that, but it's a campus situation, so it calls. I don't know what those resources are. And I want to acknowledge what you said and appreciate what you said about the community that we are in. Not everybody is receptive to police. And so that is we're very heights, very aware that is just not helpful in a lot of situations. So I really appreciate, that. It just depends on the situation. Really encourage, and I don't know if you've been this yet, but CSU, these have corresponders and they are mental health providers. They come to the situation, however, they come to police. And that's the issue, is that they show up at the police. And now they're there to make sure that the area is clear. And the correspondent, and that may escalate, which I love that you want to de-escalate. Good area that's safer. And I love that you also want somebody who's fabulous. A lot of TikTok is probably one of the best things you and to be different. Also, you can find another good thing. And again, I don't know if it's maybe working. Definitely like to see them please. Network, we also have where you're talking about thousands of people want to now. You're talking to people that are not affiliated with this. And that's a problem, I think. That's the need. However, some extent is great.
Yeah, it all depends on, because I wanted to see my customer on crisis, might not have a lot of the escalation. So I think, best case scenario, if they can get somebody calmed down enough to use space that they get out of their bit, or they have clinicians who will come on to the net and have interested they get along with the first that they would like them out all crisis time, so the call for this all yes, because of all network has on call therapist. But I think it's something we would think really yes, get them to go outside or just only crowd in your best first bet, and then just get an idea of what they're interested in. Because we need to have there is one or two different issues cause I think that's that one that you want to do.
So with all that, I think a lot of times there's a financial element on toss that out.
Yeah.
I can imagine people, if you come and say, oh, I'm gonna call so and so, or we're gonna get this help. There may be like this increased panic about. So is that, where's the reality there versus, oh, these are free for people in crisis versus, oh, they're gonna talk to a therapist, I can't afford to do that. So talk a little bit about that.
I personally don't know all that much about, because there's so many resources. I don't know which ones charge what and who, so it's always just, let's just take it one step at a time, give them a call, ask those questions, find out. They usually won't, they'll let you know if they're not charging you, they'll let you know before they get into whatever it is too. And that's also another good point, to have an idea yourself of some of the resources as much as you can, as much as you're able and willing and interested in knowing. That really helps to kind of be able to send people in the right areas. Or if you just go to like connections, and they'll be able, that's like your job. So they'll know, oh, they'll charge you, only qualify for this if you're low income, that sort of thing. So just using the resources you have, and again, just saying, we'll figure it out together.
Yeah, and typically, I think in crisis spaces, really like with what you were describing, where people are pretty heightened and dysregulated, leaning on some of those like regulation skills, active listening skills first, and really focusing efforts in that area before jumping in to start problem solving and kind of working through the details, recognizing that like in that moment, just bringing that energy level down and that regulation kind of into a, better space is really important. So that people then can kind of think through some options and things.
It does help, most of the phone lines are free.
Yeah.
Like, you just call crisis line, that's free, and I do know, I'm just starting up to work there, if you go to some, they touch every insurance and if you don't have insurance, they, really.
I think most services are pretty accessible in terms of that. In terms of it being like available and free or set cost or something like that. In my experience, I honestly haven't run.
Or others there.
We are pretty well resourced here in Larimer County, for sure.
So I don't know if I keep thinking through that scenario and, I'm thinking about what if you weren't comfortable walking this person somewhere yourself? That's very possible. I'm wondering if outreach for cons isn't necessarily the most appropriate, if there's another resource at CSU that's like comparable, because that is their whole job, is to be like that crisis intervention middleman. So like, you don't have to feel like this person's saying your responsibility, and you don't feel like you have to be the one to call the cops, and you feel like they're in good hands. So I'm curious, if you had any ideas about like a middleman, or maybe you just ask a coworker that is comfortable. Sorry, I just had some reels turning around that.
I'm sorry, because it's a kind of question, not a response to what was said. Like I had an experience recently that somebody was sharing a kind of traumatic situation she was through. And I was crying. So I more like triggered thing in her that she also started crying. So bringing it down to engagement and connection, should I have this from that kind of, listening to her? Because I think I wouldn't be able to if you don't work out, what do I do?
A great question. Do you feel like you have folks around you in your work environment or in these spaces that you could go to kind of collaborate and get support in that?
Well, in the first place, one may not know it's going to like be like that,
Right.
going to end like that. So sometimes when I'm emotional like that, I become so embarrassed that I don't want somebody else.
I'm similar. I'm easily emotional, and I'm getting teary eyed when someone's telling me their story. I'm trying to just, positive and like, you got this, but it's hard. In that case, I think that's when you just go back to the self-regulation and like really staying in and enjoying yourself. And you want to, I'm a helper, right? I want to help, but I'm also emotional. So it's like, gotta find that happy middle ground. So, maybe next time if this sort of thing were to come up again, just remembering what happened this time. And I think you still engaged because you care. And if you didn't, maybe you feel bad for not engaging. So I think you engage, but once you recognize that it's affecting you on a bigger level, you just, maybe you say, let me go grab someone else that I think would be good to talk to you. Just again, finding that help, collaborating, like Hannah said, with other folks that might be able to support you in that situation. And then kind of stepping back, but not doing so abruptly, ensuring that they're supporting, you're not just like walking away from them. Because that can definitely do harm to both of them. I mean, you can feel all sorts of ways after that for walking away from someone that's distraught. So that would be my suggestion, is just still engage, do your best, but if it's something that you just know you can't do or that you won't be able to do, I think always just finding support.
And just to name too, it's definitely not bad for us to like display emotions or feel emotions when we're supporting other people in those spaces. It's okay. I would imagine that means that you're being really empathetic and you're actually really connecting with what's happening for this other person. I think the line with that like enmeshment piece that I talked about, kind of staying in that zone of fabulousness, is if you feel those emotions in that moment, but then you're able to later on leave that situation, take care of yourself, kind of process that for yourself versus like carrying those emotions for the next 2 weeks and just owning that and feeling like I have to fix this, I have to change this for that person. That's really that line, but it's okay. That's human connection. We get emotional. We're touched by things that people are experiencing. Sometimes that means we're listening empathetically. So don't ever feel like bad or like you did something wrong if you are feeling emotions or like if you're emotional when someone's talking to you about something that's difficult. That's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't shy away from it just because you feel like you're not the one that should be upset. I think, again, it does mean you're being empathetic and you are connected. So just being able to really feel that and deal with it, not just, again, carry on much.
Was there another hand over this way?
No, I was just thinking of the situation that happened a number of years ago when I was like earlier employee here and employee fails to show up to a shift, comes in to apologize after that. A sexual assault situation. And kind of first inkling being like one called realize too that like everything's not a nail, that they come like a hammer kind of situation. And so kind of getting to a point where she's okay and but wanted kind of escort back. So like it'll be reaching out to somebody, hey, is there a way of forgiveness? Boom, they don't get safe. And the police didn't. And kind of like in hindsight, the different way that could be handled, or maybe that those were that just with what you have, all the evidence. Hindsight that this is okay, it's not okay. Just trying to hopefully not create more harm. Kind of looking for a situation she felt like she needed to take a picture.
Yeah, the safe walk idea is a great one. I think currently too, there's some great resources with like the victim assistance team with WGAC that folks can call and connect with. But I think you bring up another really important point in that all of these scenarios that we're talking about are really gray. And when we work with people, we just simply cannot control all the variables. We just can't. And so coming into these situations with that awareness of recognizing this could make it worse. I want to, support this person in the way that feels best for them and give them agency and give them choice in this situation as much as I possibly can is really, really powerful. And we can't ever control for like every outcome of every situation. So I also want y'all to be cognizant of that for yourselves as you're working through these things. Like none of us have all the answers to every situation. We never could. So don't carry that too heavily either, I guess is what I would say.
So if there were like a sensitive situation, we don't put it on, it'd be better to ask questions at the end. Or if they have the capacity to answer.
In terms of just like getting their input.
Just like saying.
Open-ended questions are a big one.
Yep.
And giving them a lot of space to talk and not just give you yes and no's, because oftentimes it can be a no, but it's not a no, or you know what I mean? So open-ended questions are big.
And being okay too with sometimes people in crisis don't always know what they need and they won't always be able to verbalize that, which is also something that makes this challenging and gray. But again, being willing to continue asking some of the open-ended questions, being willing to sit with somebody sometimes, even in silence, We didn't really talk about that, but sometimes just being physically present next to someone is powerful and helpful as they're kind of regulating and figuring out what's happening for them. So I think sometimes people also get discouraged because they're like, oh, I asked all these questions and I asked them what they needed and they didn't tell me. And it's like, they maybe couldn't in that moment, and that's okay too. Being present, giving the space for them to do so is really important and huge. Any last questions, thoughts? We can send out some of the resource stuff and links if that's helpful for folks, just so you have it. But high fives to you all, because all of you, I think, working in this space with so many different people every day, you're doing a lot. And the fact that you showed up in this room wanting to support people, wanting to build some more knowledge and tools around this is really powerful and honestly makes my heart feel really happy for our CSU community. The fact that so many people in so many different roles have an interest in this and feel invested in this. So thanks for being here today and for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Oh, supposed to tell you, there's an evaluation. There's a QR code. I will show it to you momentarily. Here we go.
What's it, the room number?
No, let me look.
Oh.
I want to say it's 212.
I also did not see it on.
Oh,
It's on the front page of our presentation.
oh yeah, let me go back. I think it's 212.
Another one.
Uh,
212 is.
Yeah. Maybe it's graded.
It's not
Yeah, it's not.
That's what they're saying.
Oh, maybe. It might just not be listed for some reason, or it's not working.
I was gonna say, this sounds like a organizer.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess if we just put your name, they'll figure it out who it is.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the only one we're doing, so that's correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.